Okay, so this is a PowerPoint. This is the lab that I work for. The doctor I work for, his name's Ryan Herringa. He's a child and adolescent psychiatrist at UW-Madison. And he specializes in trauma-focused behavioral cognitive therapy. And he is a therapist for children that have undergone some sort of trauma. But most of these you can apply to adults, and then we can talk more about 9/11, national disasters, things like that that can trigger post-traumatic stress disorders. Everybody thinks like the stereotypical idea of post-traumatic stress disorder is veterans coming back from war. They've seen a lot of violence, they've seen a lot of killing, a lot of really, really traumatic things. They come back, they have flashbacks, they have anxiety symptoms, things like that. And actually, a lot of people don't even realize that children can have post-traumatic stress disorder, and that it's actually fairly common. So we'll go into what types of things, and again, I'll try to apply this as much to kind of what you guys are doing, because this is specifically what my lab studies. So consequences of child trauma are also consequences of general trauma with adults as well. Maltreatment trauma usually leads to low achievement and low motivation. So here's a kind of a weird statistic. 42%, only 42% of maltreated children even complete high school. So they're not very motivated academically. And too, and this again applies to adult traumas as well. Clinical outcomes when somebody experiences trauma usually leads to outbursts. In children, it's typically behavior problems, outbursts. A lot of times PTSD in children is actually misdiagnosed as ADHD. And so PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, there's 4 big categories that people or psychiatrists use when they diagnose post-traumatic stress disorder. Reliving the trauma, that includes the intrusive memories, the nightmares. A lot of people suffering with PTSD have problems sleeping because they have such bad nightmares. They wake up feeling like they've actually relived the trauma. They have triggers, which are these trauma reminders. If they see certain things, all of a sudden they'll have a flashback. They'll remember the trauma really, really readily. A lot of people have panic attacks, difficulty breathing. Like I said, people typically think the child has ADHD, has depression, and so they misdiagnose these kids and they start medicating them, and their symptoms aren't going away. They're still having flashbacks, they're still feeling anxiety. And a lot of the times it's diagnosed as something else. And once you diagnose PTSD, it's really, really easy to get good treatment for it, and it makes it a lot easier to handle all these symptoms. And most of the time it's, once we get the word out and once people start knowing what PTSD is, they can start looking for those little signs that I've been telling you about. And once you spot those signs, you're actually able to find better therapies for PTSD, because it is its own category of mental illness, and so it has to be treated that way. The biggest type of psychotherapy is exposure therapy. And so what they do is the doctor will have them sit down and very, very gradually will have them start to explain what happened to them. You never want them to tell you everything right off the bat, because that's just going to make everything worse. So what you do is you gradually have the doctor, or you talk to the doctor about your trauma. And the more exposure you get to what happened, the more accustomed you are to realizing, and actually it's good to mention, you're doing this in a very safe space. The doctor tells you now, when you're telling me this, you're in a safe space, nobody's judging you, nobody's going to hurt you. And so the goal is to get them to associate in their brain that trauma with the safe space. So once they associate that, those anxiety symptoms are relieved once something triggers it. Let's say in the case of 9/11, in one of your characters, you see footage of planes hitting the Twin Towers. That might be a trigger. After trauma-focused psychotherapy, it would still be a trigger, but because of the therapy, your body would realize, I'm in a safe space. It still brings back bad memories, and it'll always bring back bad memories, but because you realize you're in a safe space, you don't feel anxiety, you don't feel panic.